to get started, open up your Unity starter project, which is included in the source files. You can also work with any other game, and we'll just show you the overall steps for integrating TikTok into that game. So you can use any game. You can even use an empty project. We have created a starter project that you can work with in the Unity editor, which we are using version 6.5 beta in this course. You want to go to the header and make sure that for the services that you have AI enabled. This will allow you to open the AI assistant. Note that with a new account, you do get free credits, but after your credit usage has run out, then you have to pay for more credits. You also have to make sure to connect your current project to the Unity cloud, which you'll get a link to do so here if you haven't already. Then you can open the Unity AI assistant, and this is where we are going to be doing our prompting. So we're going to use prompts to connect the TikTok integration into our game. Remember that AI is inherently random, so you won't see exactly the same result each time, especially if you're working with a different game other than the game that we are working on, but you will see the overall steps. So let's get started, coming up next. Before we dive into generating our code and our integration, we want to cover some debugging tips for Unity AI Assistant. Because as you generate your TikTok integration, you're going to find that bugs will come up, and these can be random depending on what game you're working with. And just because AI in general gives slightly random or slightly different responses each time, even if you give it the same exact prompt for the same exact game, you could still get a different response each time. So some tips for debugging is use the ask feature before you use the agent feature. So first ask Unity to implement a functionality, or why is there this issue with my game, then move to the plan phase, then to the agent phase. So sometimes if you jump straight into agent phase, which in agent mode, the AI is actually changing code, writing code, but sometimes it helps to ask first, which is chat only, which prevents the AI from jumping straight into code and focuses more on debugging the issue first, or planning the technical implementation first. So that is one tip for debugging with Unity AI Assistant. Another tip is to follow best prompting practices for the Unity AI Assistant. This includes giving the current state first of your project, then giving the desired outcome or the desired state of your project after the next prompt, and then giving technical implementation if you have it. Now, you'll see we have some sophisticated prompts in this course, but it's all right if your prompts are not very sophisticated, if they're more simple, but you can use an AI like Unity AI Assistant in ask mode, or even a separate external AI like Claude to plan out prompts and feed the assistant or the AI the best practices that it should follow for writing those prompts. So that way you're not just saying, help me in the prompt, you're actually giving a more detailed, specific prompt that uses best practices according to Unity's own best practices for the AI assistant. So that is another tip for debugging here with the Unity AI assistant. As well, throughout using the assistant, I found that it is higher quality at debugging compared to an external AI tool. Because you might want to decide to go ask ChatGPT about the project, but it actually does help to stay in the Unity AI assistant because it has the context of your project. So if you do have an issue, try asking the Unity AI assistant first. As well, stay in the same chat, because in the Unity AI assistant, you can add multiple chats, but if you make a new chat, it's going to lose the context of your previous chat. So for better memory and context, stay in the same chat. You can close the assistant, you can close Unity, or you can reopen it tomorrow, but you can go back to the same chat because there is a chat history. So go back to that same chat that you were working on and stay in that chat if you can. And it is quite a long chat history, so you won't hit the limit too quickly. And that does help to stay in that same chat. Now, because the assistant is in beta mode right now and Unity AI is in beta mode right now, you might find that it crashes or it's a bit buggy, but in that case, you can restart Unity and reopen it back up. So if you find you get issues with connecting to the server, then you can just restart Unity, reopen that same chat, and try again. So anything in beta mode will be a bit buggy. I found it was a bit crashing at first, but then over time it stabilized. So at the beginning of my project, I had issues where the Unity AI assistant would crash a few times, but then after a few rounds of that, restarting the Unity editor, then it stopped crashing. So soon it will move out of the beta phase and it will be more stable, but any kind of beta system will be a bit unstable. So those are some tips for debugging. You know, every game is different. Every prompt response is going to be different. So we're going to be showing you the pattern of steps you need to take to integrate this TikTok functionality. But, you know, the AI could introduce a bug that is not covered in this course. And so you will have to then use these debugging tips to debug your particular project. But in general, you see the patterns that you have to take, and as well, you'll get these source codes so you can actually see what the code should look like at the end. So let's get started building out our first configuration. Coming up in the next lectures, we're going to build the integration for TikTok in your Unity game. Now, there's different approaches. If you're building the game for TikTok from the start, then you might follow a different workflow where you build out the integration from the very beginning and you add the game features on top of that. But we're going to assume that you already have a game and you want to put it on TikTok. So we already have our game built, and next we're going to integrate the features that we need or add them into the game so that the game is compatible with the TikTok requirements. The first step is building the config scriptable object. A configuration is a small file holding the settings that the game needs to talk to TikTok, like the web address of your backend server and a switch that says use fake responses while testing, and then turn off that switch, of course, when publishing. A scriptable object is Unity's preferred way to store this kind of settings file. It shows up in the Unity interface like any other asset, and you can edit the fields of the object visually, and the code can read the fields at runtime. So we're going to create the settings file so that later we can have a consistent place to look for configuration instead of values scattered throughout the code. So we're going to prompt to Unity AI. Following best practices, we'll start with the current state. We're going to assume that we have a game that's playable in the editor. This might be a game that you've built with us or a game that you have on your own. And in our prompt, we're going to state, I have a hard-coded useDevStubs true flag in the cosmetics effects code that I want to replace with a real config asset. As per best practice for prompting for Unity, we want to state the desired outcome. In this case, a scriptable object asset that holds TikTok integration configuration and is loadable at runtime via resources.load. Then we can also provide the technical details like create the assets, scripts, TikTok config C# file as a scriptable object with create asset menu. The public serialized fields that we need are the backend base URL, which we're going to create the URL so that way during testing we can test out with a sample server. We'll also have a field of use dev stubs default true, but you can toggle this on and off if you're developing or if you're publishing. We also need to create an instance asset at TikTok config.asset using asset database. Refactor the debug button visibility check in the cosmetics effects code if you have such in your game to load this asset via resources.load TikTok config and read use dev stubs from it. In this case, we don't have any rewarded ads at this stage, so we don't have any add unit ID field. So that will be our first step, and then the agent is going to build out that scriptable object. The agent is then going to define the TikTok configuration first focused on establishing a scriptable object to manage TikTok integration. This involves creating a TikTok config asset that will house settings like the backend base URL and a development flag, replacing any previous hard-coded approach that you might have had in your game. So we have a code edit in this case, as well as creating the instance that we asked for of that TikTok config. So that way you actually will have one of it. And the response that we get is I've created a TikTok config system to replace the hard-coded debug flags. Changes include creating a new scriptable object class in the path of assets scripts TikTok with fields for backend base URL and use dev stubs. Generated the actual config file at tiktokconfig.asset to allow you to toggle the debug tools directly from the inspector. And refactored the roundcontroller.cs, updated the initialization logic to load the TikTok config at runtime via resources.load. The simulate return button now dynamically shows or hides based on the use dev stubs setting in the config asset. You can find that new asset created at the path, and changing the use dev stubs checkbox will now control the visibility of the debug button in the game. So we can check out some of those files if we like. You can click on them here in the Unity AI Assistant, or you can also check out the files in your project folder, TikTok config. Find that in the resources folder where we have the fields for the backend base URL and using dev stubs on or off. So we will be setting the backend base URL later on. By default, it will be empty, but later on, we're going to actually build out that backend base URL. So that way we have somewhere to host our secrets or TikTok environment variables. So now we have completed building out the TikTok config. We can move on to the next step of our project, which is writing the JavaScript bridge to the TikTok software development kit.